Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, October 27th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Do you ever ask yourself, why do I feel this way? Or why am I thinking this? Well, you're not the only one.
And I think that idea that there's a whole bunch of things happening inside our heads that we're not aware of, I think that's endlessly interesting to listeners and to me.
The host of the popular podcast Hidden Brain speaks with us about the show's impact and why it resonates with curious listeners. That conversation in just a moment.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our feature story. The holidays are fast approaching, and with that comes a lot of fun things. Holiday decor, good food, Friendsgivings, and parties. But it can also be a tough time, filled with sadness or tense family gatherings around the table. And sometimes we don't feel like we have the tools to navigate these moments. But what if I told you there is a show that can help? Hidden Brain explores the unconscious thoughts and behaviors that guide our lives. Host Shankar Vedantam speaks with researchers and psychologists on a number of topics, from why conversations go wrong, to why marriage is hard, to how to minimize pain and maximize joy. Hidden Brain is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and Shankar's been touring the States, sharing insights he's gained over the last decade. If you're a listener of KVPR, you know we carry Hidden Brain on KVPR's broadcast, and I recently had the opportunity to speak with Shankar about why the show is so successful. With the holidays coming up, I thought it was the perfect time to speak with Shankar about how to navigate tough times and interpersonal conflict. But first, we start with a celebration. So, first of all, Shankar, congratulations on 10 years of Hidden Brain. I just wanted to know how you feel reaching that milestone.
I think I feel quite old, Elizabeth. The idea of doing the same thing every week for 10 years. We've come out with an episode every Monday for 10 years. That feels like a very long time, to be honest.
I can relate to that. The goal of the show is to explore unconscious patterns that drive human behavior. I'm curious, why do you think that topic's resonated with listeners for so long?
I think the reason it resonates with listeners is the same reason that it resonated with me at the start, Elizabeth, which is that when I think about my own mind, I think that I'm aware of everything that's happening inside my own head. But really, voluminous research from multiple fields, especially from psychology, suggests this is simply not the case. An analogy that I like to use is that, we've all been to a play or to the theater. And when you're watching a play, there's stuff happening on the front of the stage, on the stage itself. But we all know that in order for what's happening on the stage to happen, a whole host of things must have happened or are happening backstage. And in some ways, our brains are exactly the same way. We're aware of what's happening in the front and on stage, if you will. But to allow that to happen, a whole host of things need to be happening backstage. And I think that idea that there's a whole bunch of things happening inside our heads that we're not aware of, I think that's endlessly interesting to listeners and to me.
Absolutely, those sort of blind spots that we have. I'd love if you gave us some insight into the origin of Hidden Brain and where the name comes from.
So the term hidden brain is a term that I coined as I was writing a book in 2010. The book was also called The Hidden Brain, and it looked at all of these different ways in which our judgments, our perceptions, our decisions are swayed by factors outside of our conscious awareness. Now, sometimes, we are not paying attention to something just because our attention is focused elsewhere. I'm talking with you right now, Elizabeth. I'm not really paying attention to the decor on the walls, for example. So there are aspects of the hidden brain where we can become aware of that portion of what our minds are showing us or what our eyes are telling us if we turn the spotlight of our attention to whatever it is we want to focus on. But there are many other parts of our minds that are permanently sealed off from introspection. There are many aspects of the brain where no matter how hard you introspect, you really cannot see how your brain is working. And that's the origin of the term. The term was really coined to describe this range of factors that affects us without our awareness.
When you pivoted from writing about this work to radio, did you imagine the project would last this long?
I did not. And in some ways, I didn't quite realize that audio and radio would be such wonderful mediums to talk about these ideas. And I think I've discovered that for myself. Audio is a remarkably intimate medium in some ways. People are listening when they're going for walks or in the car or as they're doing their dishes or, even in bed as they're sleeping. And something about radio allows the ideas to seep in under our conscious awareness. It's almost a hidden brain kind of phenomenon almost. The other thing that radio allows is it allows storytelling and narrative storytelling so that when we tell stories about people, our listeners in some ways are creating movies inside their own heads. And those movies in some ways are very rich because the listeners have created those movies for themselves. And both those reasons, I think, are powerful reasons why Hidden Brain has worked so well as an audio product. I venture to say it has worked better in audio than it worked in print.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. For the listeners, I want to highlight a couple of recent topics you've covered. Let's see, there's how to receive negative feedback, escaping perfectionism, navigating breakups, how our brains learn, and many more similar topics. So when it comes to picking a topic to cover, what's guiding your decision making?
In many ways, I think we're looking for researchers who have a lengthy history of doing research on that topic, whose work has been well received and peer reviewed in prominent journals, people who have spent sometimes a lifetime thinking about a specific topic. And we're often looking for those people, and we want to try and find ways to not only feature them on the show, but to make sure that their ideas are accessible and relevant to audience members who are listening. We're also asking the question with every guest that we are thinking of profiling or bringing on the show, how their work actually speaks to everyday people's lives. One of the things that I've noticed is that as people have become very expert in certain topics, if you have a psychologist or a neuroscientist who is focused, for 15 years or 20 years on a single topic, they very often forget to speak in a way that is accessible to ordinary people. So a significant portion of what we do as we're putting together episodes is asking the question, how can we take this complex set of ideas and make it interesting, make it accessible, and most importantly, make it relevant so that as people are hearing the research, they're hearing echoes of the implications of that research in their own lives.
You mentioned everyday people's lives, and I'm excited to speak with you now at this time of year because we're actually approaching the holidays, which are always fun, but can also be really stressful. There's interpersonal issues that can arise with family and friends. It can also be a time of great sadness for some people. So
Yes.
based on your work with so many researchers and psychologists, what kind of comes to mind as a key tip that listeners can take away from this conversation to navigate the stress of the holidays or really just tough times in general?
When I think about this time of year, I'm thinking about people sitting around a Thanksgiving table, and often it's bringing together people whom you might not hang out with all the time. And some of these people might have views and opinions that are very different from yours. And that sometimes has been a source of tension. Some people are choosing not to attend family Thanksgiving dinners because they don't want to talk with somebody whose political views clash with their own. One useful tip came from a researcher named Kurt Gray, who's done a lot of work looking at how in our ancestral past, in our evolutionary history, we have a very finely tuned sense of fear. Our sense of fear is what helped our ancestors stay alive and avoid the risk of predators. That's how we came to be. And so our brains in some ways come equipped with this very fine, system for navigating threats and fear. And when we listen to people whose views we disagree with, we very often feel like those views are wrong-headed. Sometimes we feel those views are malevolent or wrong or actively at risk of harming us. But it's helpful to remember that people often come to their very strong views because they themselves are experiencing some form of fear. The fear in some ways is behind many of our very, very strong opinions. Now, that doesn't mean that when you're sitting down at the Thanksgiving table with your uncle and you and your uncle have very different points of view, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be hunky-dory, but it does allow us, if you will, a moment of compassion to basically say, the reason this other person has these views that I think are completely wrong is because this person is animated by some sense of threat or some sense of fear. And understanding what that fear or that threat is in some ways is a way of making a connection with that person, because all of us understand what it is to be frightened, what it is to be fearful.
Absolutely. The topic for your anniversary podcast was about pursuing a calling and sort of the power in that and also the downsides. I'm curious if you feel like you found your calling and why that was a good topic for your anniversary episode.
Yes, I think we picked that topic for the anniversary episode precisely because I think those of us who are lucky enough to work at Hidden Brain feel like, in fact, we have found our calling. I certainly feel that way. And in many ways, our conversation with the researcher Jennifer Toasty Karras was revealing because I think it talked about many of both the upsides as well as the downsides of pursuing a calling. When you have a calling, you're more energized, you're more passionate about the work you do, you're able to do it for longer periods of time. It might be the reason we've been able to come out with a show every Monday for 10 years is precisely because we're pursuing a calling. But a calling also comes with downsides. You tend to become single-minded. You tend to become a little obsessive. I know that I spend too many family vacations staring at my phone or thinking about, the episode that we're going to be putting out next week, much to the chagrin of my family. And so in some ways, callings have both these upsides and downsides. And we explored both of those in those episodes. And I think both of those in some ways are true of my own life.
And lastly, what's next for Hidden Brain?
Well, one of the things that we have been doing this past year is we've actually launched a nationwide tour. I've visited 15 cities so far this year, and we have more lined up next year. I'm hoping that in the coming year, we can also broaden the scope of the events that we're doing to visit cities like Fresno, especially college towns, smaller towns. Public radio is in a moment of existential threat right now. And I'd like to figure out if there's ways in which we can marry together what we're doing on the Hidden Brain tour with the interests and needs of local public radio stations.
We would love if you came to Fresno. Keep us in mind.
Absolutely.
Shankar Vedantam, host of Hidden Brain, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's been a pleasure.
That was my conversation with the host of Hidden Brain, Shankar Vedantam. You can listen to Hidden Brain on KVPR's broadcast. We air the show on Monday nights at 9 and Saturday mornings at 10. You can listen on 89.3 FM in Fresno, 89.1 in Bakersfield, or you can always stream us on the KVPR app through your smart speaker or at kvpr.org. And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.